Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to our discussion of the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, we've got several long-term causes that go all the way back to the beginning of our nation, and even in some cases before that, and then we have some immediate causes. Right now, many historians are saying that the cause of the Civil War is states' rights, and that is not untrue. As we go back to the very beginning, when we've got our Constitution, but people are arguing that a strong central government is not the way to go, that the states need to have their say. It goes all the way back to that Federalist, anti-Federalist discussion, where the Federalists believe that a strong federal government, a strong national government should be the predominant leader of the country, whereas many other people believe that state government should have more of a say. That's that conflict between states' rights and federal control that has gone all the way back to the very beginning. As we get into the 1860s, though, we also see that economic divide. With the first industrial revolution, the market revolution, we see the rise of mechanization in the North. More factories are springing up, more mechanized production is being done, whereas in the South, cotton's king. So agriculture and the idea of an agrarian South is predominantly taking hold still. But conflict in the territories is also a major cause. As we saw in our discussion of sectionalism, not only are we seeing that division between North and South, but now we're adding the Western territories in as well. And when a territory tries to become a state, should it be slave? Should it be free? Does the federal government have the right to determine things of that nature? All of those conflicts are floating around by the 1860s. Immediate causes of the war are the election of Lincoln in 1860. Many Southerners are very upset about this because in 1858, when Lincoln runs for the Illinois Senate seat against Stephen Douglas, he makes it very known that he's part of that free soil argument. And even makes this speech, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." So he puts himself out there as a man who believes that we can't continue on this path. And this makes him very popular with the abolitionist sect of the nation. Makes him very not so popular, I guess you could say, in the South, because he's going against that idea of slavery. So when Lincoln is elected in 1860, takes office in 1861, the South sees that as the last straw. You have now elected, and because Lincoln is elected by complete Northern vote, he does not win a single Southern state in his election. Many Southern states, beginning with South Carolina, believe that this is it. And they leave. They secede from the Union. And then the final straw is the firing on Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is a tiny little fort in the harbor of Charleston, and it's being kept by Northern troops. So Southern troops begin to fire on Fort Sumter to try to get the Northern troops to leave, and this becomes the first battle, so to speak, of the war. So Lincoln's election in 1860 is the first step in the immediate causes. South Carolinians feel that the victory for this Republican president would bring an end to slavery and seceded from the U.S. Because at this point in time, that Republican Party is very abolitionist. Remember, most of the Republican Party is housed in the North. They are very free soil, very abolitionist. And South Carolina just sees that as the last straw. That's it. We're out. So that happens in 1860. By 1861, 7 southern states had seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. So this is their own nation. And then by February of 1861, the entire Deep South had seceded or left the Union and joined the Confederacy. The Upper South, however, did not really view Lincoln's election as a death sentence. So they didn't really secede immediately after he's elected, but many of them do eventually follow suit. The Constitution of the Confederacy is very similar to the U.S. Constitution. These people had been previously Americans. They'd been previously part of the United States. So they kind of take a lot of cues from the U.S. Constitution, except that in the Confederate Constitution, they protect slavery and states' rights, two major arguments that end up leading to the Civil War. They outlaw tariffs. Remember, tariffs are a tax on imports and exports. And they're very upset about tariffs from way back at the beginning of the market revolution and into like the nullification crisis in the Jackson administration. So in the early part of the 1800s, they see this as a problem and they voice their opinions as such. So when they create their own government, okay, well, we'll just outlaw them. We can make our own rules. And they create a weak national government. So at this point, basically, we see strong individual state governments and a weak overall government because that's what they were arguing for in the first place. And they elect Jefferson Davis as their president. So now we have a fully divided nation. Abraham Lincoln is the president of the Union. Jefferson Davis is the president of the Confederacy. Lincoln viewed Southern secession as illegal. What right do these people have to leave the Union? Can they even do that? He sees it as illegal, and he promises to preserve the Union. Whatever our politics, the Constitution must be sustained, is a quote from Lincoln at this point in time. He also says, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." This is a direct quote from Abraham Lincoln in 1862. Lincoln is not first and foremost an abolitionist. He's a preservationist. He wants to preserve the United States and the integrity of the U.S. Constitution at all costs. So his main goal is not to abolish slavery, it's to preserve the Union. So in April of 1861, federal soldiers refused Confederate demands to vacate Fort Sumter. They gave them warning because technically Fort Sumter, being in Charleston Harbor, is Confederate territory, and these Yankee soldiers don't need to be there. And so when Lincoln sent aid to those Union soldiers, Confederates fired on the fort. The firing on Fort Sumter proved to be the start of the Civil War. And so I have a short video for you. Let's take a look at it.
The Civil War began at 4:30 a.m. on the 12th of April, 1861. General Pierre-Gustave Toutant Beauregard ordered his Confederate gunners to open fire on Fort Sumter, at that hour only a dark shape out in Charleston Harbor. Confederate Commander Beauregard was a gunner, so skilled as an artillery student at West Point that his instructor kept him on as an assistant for another year. That instructor was Major Robert Anderson, Union commander inside Fort Sumter.
All the pent-up hatred of the past months and years is voiced in the thunder of these cannon, and the people seem almost beside themselves in the exaltation of a freedom they deem already won.
The signal to fire the first shot was given by a civilian, Edmund Ruffin, a Virginia farmer and editor, who had preached secession for 20 years. Of course, he said, I was delighted to perform the service. "34 hours later, a white flag over the fort ended the bombardment. The only casualty had been a Confederate horse. It was a bloodless opening to the bloodiest war in American history.
The first gun that was fired at Fort Sumter sounded the death knell of slavery. They who fired it were the greatest practical abolitionists this nation has produced.
April 13th. So Civil War is inaugurated at last. God defend the right.
So after Fort Sumter, the Upper South finally decides to secede. They finally decide, okay, look, enough is enough, and they leave the Union, and they join the Confederacy. Now, not all slave states seceded. There are a few that stayed in the Union, but they still had slavery within their borders. We consider these border states. Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware are all what we would call border states. And at the outbreak of the Civil War, the North has a lot of advantages over the South, but they also have a lot of challenges they need to overcome. So in their advantages, they have a larger population of troops because this is the federal army. They also have a greater industrial capacity. At this point, we're in 1861. The North has been fairly industrial for several years now, and they have the factories that they can convert to making wartime goods. They also have a huge edge in railroad transportation. At this point, there's not that many railroads in the South. And even where there are railroads, they're not always interconnected. So the transportation aspect is also quite large. But they've got some disadvantages as well. The North needs to invade the South to win. They need to invade and they need to take over. And at this point, they feel as though it's going to be difficult to maintain enthusiasm and support for the war over the long haul. Even when the war starts, many people believe it's going to be very short, few months at tops, and it's going to be over. Especially in the South, that is the mindset. Although outnumbered and less industrial, the South does also have some advantages. President Davis knew that the Confederacy doesn't have to win the war. They just have to drag out the fight so long that they make the North give up and quit. The South also has what we would consider like home court advantage or home field advantage, because the North has to come into the South to fight, and most of the South are good old boys from hometowns. So as they're going through and fighting, it's going to be those Southern troops that really know the lay of the land, and they have that tactical advantage over the North. So land and farms, the Union beats the Confederacy 58% to 42. Population, 71% to 29. Railroad, 71 to 29. Factories, 86 to 14. So we see that large divide when the war begins. But the Confederacy has the military leadership. At the very beginning, Lincoln goes to Robert E. Lee, who had been a top of his class West Point graduate, West Point being a major military academy where many of our generals in the Civil War hail from. He had been a great leader in the Mexican-American War, and Lincoln knows that he has a great military mind. And so Lincoln goes to him and says, I would like you to be the commanding general of the Union Army. And Lee decides he's going to think about it. And then when Virginia secedes, Lee tells Lincoln, I must go the way of Virginia goes. And Virginia seceded, so Robert E. Lee ends up becoming the commanding general of the Confederate forces. But the Confederacy has a lot of other very strong military minds. They have Stonewall Jackson. They have Jeb Stuart, Nathan Bedford Forrest, Braxton Bragg, George Pickett. These are just names being thrown out there. Many of these men are very prominent military minds of their time. And the Confederacy could use King Cotton diplomacy to entice England and France to support the South. And the idea behind this is that if we can get France and England to support us and recognize us as a sovereign nation, maybe we've got a chance to win. This is the thought process of those leaders of the Confederacy, because they need that support. And both England and France are major buyers of the South's main export, King Cotton. So as we move into the Civil War, let's look at a brief overview of the war itself.
The American Civil War will be described by most American historians as the most cataclysmic event in the nation's history and the one that came closest to destroying the Union.
And at the heart was really the issue of slavery. And that issue remained in the background. It was, a constant source of tension between states in which slavery was permitted, indeed became part of the economy. It was a way of life, actually. And eventually, of course, it erupted into what became known as the Civil War.
That was the schizophrenia that America had at that point. We were the land of freedom, the land of opportunity, the land of democracy, but about 35% of the people who lived there did so in chains.
It's impossible for a modern person to understand the depth of courage they had. You look at how close they stood and how long they were prepared to shoot at each other and how many casualties it took in an hour. It's almost impossible to imagine the courage, the dedication, the discipline that they showed.
Imagine warfare where your ability to load and tamp a musket faster than the guy with the other